South Adelaide, after the war, was the worst club in South Australia by a long stretch. And part of the problem was that they were stuck in the city and everyone was moving out to the suburbs, so they couldn't find any players. So in 1960, they approached an old player of theirs who was living in Darwin, and they said, "Have you got any players for us?" And he says, "There's this ruckman here who's playing for St Mary's, David Kantilla. He's 6'4", he flies like a bird." And they said, "Let's get him." Getting David Kantilla from Darwin to Adelaide was not as straightforward as it would seem. He was a ward of the Catholic Church, so he needed the permission of the Bishop of Darwin and the Department of Native Affairs, and he had to come to Adelaide under very strict conditions. South Adelaide had to send almost weekly reports back to the Department of Native Affairs saying that David was behaving himself and he was under control. All the money that he made from football was put into a trust fund for him and administered by Department of Native Affairs. So there's a 21-year-old guy from the Tiwi Islands who comes to Adelaide in the middle of winter. He's playing for the worst club in South Australia. It's cold, it's a different culture, it's a different language. South Adelaide in the early 60s were blessed with two incredible ruckmen. You had Peter Darley and David Kantilla, and they used to spell each other throughout the game. And both of them used to sneak forward and kick goals.
Kantilla and Jarrett, offhand to Kantilla! Yes, it's Kantilla!
I was fortunate enough to play with him from 62 to 64. David was an athlete. He had the ability to jump over most people from standing still. Giving a bit of a run-up, he could go over the top of anybody. He had a remarkable pair of hands on him.
Kantilla had taken the mark.
1963, South finished bottom again, and they recruit Neil Curley as captain and coach. And Curls transforms the team. They go from bottom to top. And I asked Neil, "How did you coach David Kantilla?" And he said, "I didn't. You couldn't." He said, "I just set up structures around him, let him fly."
Kantilla with a brilliant mark over the pack gains the initiative again for the Panthers.
He won the best and fairest at South his first 2 seasons. He was in the state team.
At Adelaide Oval, last season's wooden spooners, South Adelaide's Panthers take the field against their semi-final conquerors and 1963 premiers, Port Adelaide.
So the 1964 grand final, it's hard to describe it more than David and Goliath. South Adelaide, who never win anything, go from bottom against Port Adelaide at the height of their powers.
South Adelaide go down to their half-forward line where Kantilla is coming through, takes a shot in towards goal and is going to bounce through to record the first score of the final quarter.
South Adelaide knocked them off in the grand final. David Kantilla is the best player on the ground. And even the great Foss Williams from Port Adelaide had a quote about Kantilla, and he said, "He's the spark that always threatens to become a fire." In other words, he was the problem for them, and he proved that on that day.
I think we were all caught up in the euphoria of playing in a grand final. To go from bottom to top in a year is a huge achievement, of which David was an integral part of it.
David finished up at South Adelaide in the late 60s and returned to the top end. And when he passed, it was incredibly emotional for the club because he'd been such a star, but he represented something which the club really lacked, and that was that success and that happiness. And his passing was really felt very deeply by that club for a long time.
Of course I miss him. David was an integral part of the side, and we all couldn't believe it when we heard in 1978 of his passing.
So David's been honoured by a number of places, none more so than being named into the Indigenous Team of the Century. When you think that that team features Polly Farmer and Bill Dempsey, you realise the sort of company that David Kantilla keeps is extraordinary. David was the first player from the Tiwi Islands to be successful in the Southern competition. And that opened the doors. And you sort of ask your question, would we have seen the Riolis? Would we have seen Michael Long? Would we have seen Austin Wanamuri if it weren't for David Kantilla? And it's very easy to categorise people with numbers, how many games they played, how many premierships, how many medals. But some players have to be measured by the opportunities they created and what they mean to the game. And that's why David Kantilla deserves his place in the Australian Football Hall of Fame.